Thank you so much for taking some time out of your evening to join us for this webinar. Tonight, we are joined by Terace Garnier. She's an Air Force veteran, broadcast journalist, Miss International World 2023, and the author of No Longer Silent. She was the first Pentagon correspondent for Newsy. She also worked for Fox News' DC bureau. She enlisted in the Air Force in 2010 as a broadcast journalist, and as such, she produced, shot, and anchored news stories. Terace earned a master's degree in broadcast and digital journalism from Syracuse. She makes time for community service, fundraising, pageant scholarship money, mentoring women, raising money for vaccines for underprivileged children. Most importantly, she uses her experience and influence as voice and advocate for women's rights, promoting awareness, speaking out against sexual assault in the military, and supporting other survivors. So today she's joining us to speak with you guys about her book, about her experience while writing it, as well as her experience with covering trauma and how to empower your sources through your stories. So Terace, if you'd like to go ahead and tell us a little bit about your book, No Longer Silent, feel free.
Well, first and foremost, thank you so much for having me and providing this opportunity for me to be able to talk to my fellow veterans and my fellow journalists. This is really important and just really exciting to get to meet others because, as we know, there's not a lot of veterans in journalism, or if there are, we're not very vocal about it. And so it's just really an honor to be able to meet you all, and hopefully I'll be able to see you out in the field. So as she said, I'm Terace Garnier. I recently came out with a book called No Longer Silent. This is actually my hardcover version of it. I published it on Veterans Day of 2023. And the reason why I published it on that date is because that was the day that I survived being raped in the military 10 years prior. So that was the 10-year anniversary. And so for me, it was very important to, one, start my healing journey, which started at the beginning of the pandemic, which included going to counseling through vet centers and other outlets to get help on that spiritual and mental healing. And through that process, I was able to write this book with the hopes of helping other survivors, not only survivors, but also people who may not know or may not have the education as far as the stats on how many children are abused, how many boys and men are abused that don't talk about it. Yes, men can be raped. Yes, it does happen to little boys as well. And so I wanted to make sure that I brought attention to those things. And that being said, surprisingly, the demographic that purchased my book the most are men. So it was very important for me to publish this book and kind of share my own journey of overcoming and healing, and hoping that I'll be able to inspire others that, hey, you can take your power back too. If this has happened to you, this is what you can do. And if it didn't happen to you, maybe you think it happened to someone else, this is how you approach it. And this is how you speak to kids or other individuals to either help them or just find out what's going on and what those next steps are if they decide to report it and, go to the police, or if they decide to go and get help as far as counseling and whatnot. So that's my book. It's available on my website. I do have the ebook version available on Amazon, but the hardcover version and the paperback are both available on my website. It's about the same price you would pay for Amazon, but you get beautiful packaging. It's I hand wrap each one, and then I put some affirmation cards and little gifts in there as well. Just some things to spark people's thoughts on, affirmations, different things that you can do to be positive during the day. And so that's kind of what I offer when you get my book from my website. And that's kind of the synopsis of my book: overcoming being raped as a child, overcoming gun violence that I experienced as a child, then marrying a Marine who I later found out murdered someone. So that marriage didn't last that long. And then being assaulted in the military, and then trying to navigate those waters on what do I do? I was very, very well known across Asia and Europe because of my anchoring and my radio shows. I was winning a lot of awards. And so when my assault happened, I was terrified to come forward. And I was actually a part of the SARC program where I helped people report these things. So I'm encouraging other people, if this happens to you, this is what you do. And then I wasn't following my own advice because I was very public and I didn't want all of Asia and Europe to know what happened to me. But thank God I took the steps and I did report it. And you'll just have to read my book to find out what happened.
Well, thank you so much for the synopsis on your book. So let's talk a little bit about the writing process. So what were some of the thoughts that you went through? What was your overall process? And what were some of the things that you found interesting as you went through it?
Well, it started with journaling. I started anytime I would have certain feelings, I said, I just want to write it down. And I didn't make it to where I pressured myself that every night I have to write 7 pages. I just said, you know what? It's 2:15 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon, and I have some feelings going on. So I'm just going to jot down, what am I feeling? And then I'm going to sit there and think about, why am I feeling that? What may have triggered it? What is my reaction? And so that's where it started. Now, granted, I've been going to counseling since, I want to say, 2012. And I'm a huge advocate for that. I think everybody should go. Even if they haven't had a trauma situation happen, everybody should go. That's just my personal opinion, because it's a great way to talk to someone, get great advice. And then, to be honest, you don't have to worry about them going and telling people your business, because they can't, right? So they give you great advice and they have to keep your secrets. So I think it's a really good thing. So I was talking to my counselor and I said, hey, I really want to deep dive into how my childhood trauma has affected me as an adult. And I started seeing little things of how it was impacting me. Let me give you an example. Everyone that knows me, even my family, knows when I do everything, I do it to like 150%, right? It's very extreme, a lot of the stuff I do. Now, career-wise, that has propelled me to levels that most people my age have never reached. However, on a personal level, it wasn't that good. And what I ended up finding out was the reason why I was so passionate about being a journalist. I thought it was, well, I love helping people, which is true, I do. But deep down, I started realizing it was because as a child, when I told people that this man was raping me, an adult, they didn't believe me. And then I told the police and they didn't believe me. And so I never would have thought that that would lead to me later being, I want to be a journalist so I can make sure that people that are doing these things to people are found out. There's a light shown on all the evil that's going on. I never thought of that. So just in me talking to my counselor and journaling, I learned a lot about myself. And I think that was the most healing part, was journaling. It didn't matter if it was a sentence, a word or two, 7 pages, getting those emotions and those words out and then dissecting it. And I wouldn't suggest dissecting it at that very moment. Write it down, step away from it. And that's what I did. And then I would come back and say, okay, when I was driving, why did I get so angry that that person cut me off? Had nothing to do with them driving like a lunatic. It didn't, because at the end of the day, my reaction dictates everything. I chose to get mad at them. Why is that? Because they caused me to fear. They caused that inner child in me to go, okay, they're putting myself in danger. I'm fearful. Now I'm angry and lashing out. So now, I mean, I maybe still have a little bit of road rage, but it's not as bad as it used to be, because now I go, okay, me being angry about that is not going to change the fact that they're driving like a crazy person. And the only thing it's going to do is upset me all day. And what I realized when that happens, they have power over me. They are controlling me for 4 or 5 hours after they just cut me off because I'm mad and I'm thinking about how mad I am. And guess what? They're not thinking about me at all. So these are all the little things that I started learning. Now, one of the things I mentioned in my book that was really interesting for me, the journalist in me kicked in. And I said, writing this book, I want to make sure I include a lot of legal documents. Anything that I say, I'm going to back it up with 2 or 3 sources. I'm a journalist. I can't help it. And through this process, I'll give you a little background in my story. So the man who had assaulted me as a child, I had been told since I was like 13 or 14 years old that he was dead. So up until March of last year, I'm thinking this man is dead. So I'm doing research and I'm writing a chapter about him and my experiences. And I said, you know what? I want to Google and find some photos, maybe find his obituary, kind of include some background on him, because I know he had a criminal background. And through me researching and trying to find this information, I discovered that not only was he alive and well, but he lived pretty much where he assaulted me still. Several reports were filed. The police never followed up on it. He has a mile-long criminal record. And his son was living 45 minutes away from me recently got put in jail for stabbing somebody to death. And to find out that literally the man who did some really horrible, evil things to me as a child was still alive, that fear instantly, like, oh man, maybe I shouldn't publish this book, because if he finds out I'm still alive, he always told me, if I ever see you again, I will kill you. And when he said stuff, he kept his word. So I instantly had this fear, like, maybe I shouldn't publish this book because now I'm going to put my life in danger. But after praying about it and thinking about it, I said, you know what, this needs to come out. This needs to be told. And whatever's meant to happen to me is going to happen to me, no matter what I try to do. So I can either try to do the right thing, publish this book, and try to help as many people as I can before the lights go out with me, or I can not publish it and then for the rest of my life be wondering, he went along raping and molesting more children, and I could have done something to stop it, but I didn't. And that's when I said, I refuse. I refuse. I'm not going to let that man have any more power over me or my life moving forward. And so even though finding out that information was like I had a bomb dropped on me, literally, took me a week or so to kind of recollect myself and remind myself, what's my mission? This is when my military training kicks in. What's the mission? You stick to the mission. The mission was publish this book, help as many people as you can. You will not deter from that mission. And that's what became my mission and what motivated me to keep moving forward. All the women, all the boys, all the girls that I could potentially help with me publishing this book. So that was some of the things that I kind of went through. I did a lot of digging, I did FOIA requests. I spoke a lot with the local police departments to get records. I mean, it was hard trying to get records back over 20 years. And a lot of times I would call and they would say, that was 20 years ago. Why are you bothering us with this? I don't care if it was 50 years ago. They're my records. I want my records, right? So I'm like, I'm writing a book and I want to include that in there. But even with, Child Protective Services, the schools, the police departments, they weren't very forthcoming with giving me a lot of that information. And so, I did reach a lot of roadblocks or hit a lot of roadblocks, but as you'll learn if you get my book and read it, I don't let anything deter me from what I'm determined I'm going to do. I'm going to do it, and I will find a way to do it. And so, thank God I've been blessed enough to have a great counselor, great support systems with my friends, a lot of friends and family who've helped me through the process. And I think that's also very important too, especially for survivors. They need to feel heard and they need to feel supported. And so thank God I've had that, especially in the last year or so.
So that leads to a good point in terms of if you are not the person whose story is being told, how would you advise that a reporter treats that kind of situation? First of all. Second of all, what if they are doing research and they discover something like that they weren't aware of before? Do you tell the person whose story you're telling, or do you keep it from them, or what? I know the mileage varies depending on the situation, but what would your best advice be for somebody who's in that kind of situation as a third grade?
Those are some really good questions. Well, first and foremost, I've interviewed survivors before, and usually, as journalists, we research our subject matter, who we're going to interview before we interview them. So I usually have an understanding of their background. And, when we do the interview process, before we start rolling on the camera, we ask them questions to lighten them, lighten the mood and get them to open up a little bit. And depending on the vibe I get from that person, I may tell them before the interview starts, and I've done this before, I just want to let you know that I'm a survivor myself. And I want you to know that whatever you say to me, whatever you feel comfortable with, you let me know. If you're not comfortable with a question that I ask, it's pre-recorded. So if you're not comfortable, I will skip and go to another question. I don't want you to feel pressured to talk about anything you don't want to do. If you feel triggered and you need to step out, that's fine too. Do not feel pressured. I said, I was in your position, so I understand. That is so important to say that to people, even if you're not a survivor. Just letting the person that that you're about to interview that this is a safe space, unless it's a live situation, unless it's a live interview, that's different. But if it's a pre-recorded interview, you can say, look, you know, I'm going to ask you, these are the questions. This is a general idea. We never give a list of questions, but this is a general idea of what I'm going to ask. If there's anything I'm asking, please do not hesitate to say, I don't feel comfortable with that, or take your time answering it. You don't have to answer it immediately. You can take 30 seconds to think of how you want to say it. That's fine. We can edit it and cut it up so there's not that long 30-second gap. So making them feel really comfortable about it. But one of the things I would always do is, depending on the person, I would tell them I'm a survivor myself, so I understand. And you can trust that I'm going to tell your story the way it's supposed to be told. But I always also tell them I'm not biased. So if, I show 2 to 3 sides to every story, and I always tell them that. I said, so if there's something that's off-putting, I'm not going to hide it or bury it because I did an interview with you. Because at the end of the day, my job, I'm a journalist. I'm not your friend. But I am here to tell your story and tell it right. And make sure that whatever topic the story's covering is what's going to be conveyed. And thankfully, a lot of people who've worked with me don't know which way I lean politically. They don't know a lot of things about me, because when I report things, I report it, showing every angle of a story, and and let the viewer decide how they want to feel or think about that story. So I would say doing that. Also, terminology is so important. Let's say you have a man, and I had a story about a man who had been raped in the military, and you're doing an interview with him. I would ask, before you start the interview with him, how do you want me to title you, or how would you like me to refer to you? Do you want me to refer to you as a survivor, or do you want me to refer to you as a victim? Some people prefer the term victim. Me personally, I don't. So you have to make sure to ask that. You don't want to say you're a rape survivor. Maybe they don't want that term. So just make sure that you find out what terms they're comfortable with you using when you reference them. Also, as far as like terminology goes, it's so important when you ask questions that you don't ask questions where you sound like you're blaming them. Perfect example. When I was raped, the first thing my family said was, well, what were you doing? What were you wearing? Had you been drinking? Why were you wearing that? And, when you ask questions like that, you don't realize you're saying you're the problem. Why didn't you do A, B, C, and D? So you have to be very careful how you ask the questions. So let me go back to the example of the man who was raped in the military. I wouldn't say, if he said, with this situation, he said he had been raped. When he went and reported it, the military retaliated against him and kicked him out and said that he was bipolar and had a lot of mental problems. Okay. So I could have easily said, well, why didn't you go back to the military and try to appeal that? Why didn't you go to different counselors outside of the military to get help? Because he also said they were using the fact that he was going to counseling against him, and they were using that as a reason to kick him out the military. Now, I could easily ask those questions, right? But in me asking that, I'm blaming him, when I could have said, okay, well, what were all the steps that you took to try to get help and let everyone know what had happened to you? Well, I went to counseling, and then I went to my chain of command, and then they kicked me out because they said that I was unstable. Now, in that story, in that situation, the individual I was interviewing was unstable. And I ended up not being able to do the story on him because he started threatening to kill me with a gun because I wasn't working fast enough for him. So you got to be careful when you're dealing with that too. Now, when I was covering this individual, I was in the process of gathering all of his medical records, all of his mental records and everything, and I was sorting through it. But for him, I wasn't moving quick enough. And so because of that, he started emailing members of Congress, threatening them, threatening me. And so I started realizing, oh, okay, so there really was a situation there, and I really wish this hadn't happened, because I thought his story was really something that should have been told. Not to negate and not to say that those things didn't happen to him, but because of how he was acting after the fact, I had to distance myself from him. So sometimes you will get situations where people want this now. You say you're going to do a story on this. It's been a week. I know, I explained to you, I have to do research. I have to verify everything that you said. And sometimes that's not fast enough. So sometimes you'll run into situations like that. My company had to get involved, and like I ended up finding out later on that the congressional members he had been emailing, he was showing up at their job and at their house and threatening them too. So sometimes you get those kind of situations. Sorry, that was a little rabbit trail. But overall, just make sure you're being very careful that you're not blaming them. Get any records you can from them, medical, legal, any documentation, as much documentation as you can, and use that to help tell the story, because that adds more validity. And I will say a lot of networks and stations don't want to cover these kind of cases. And it's because it's so hard to prove. You have this person's word against this person's word. And unless you have an attorney involved, a lot of times they don't want to touch it. You know, they want some legal records or legal documentation, police reports, a lawsuit, text messages, emails. They want all those kind of things, and which is important, because you don't want people in the very small instances. And I want to say that again, the very small instances that people have made false reports, very small. You don't want that to be one of those situations, but the likelihood of that happening is slim to none. Because let me tell you, as someone who's a survivor who came forward and went to court about my assaulter, no man or woman wants to talk about what happened to them and then go on the stand and have people rip them apart and make it sound like they just like crazy sex. Nobody wants to go through that. So, it's very slim. It doesn't happen very often for people to just make that up. So always keep that in mind too. But that's a very good question. Now, the other question you asked, you said, if you found out information about their case, would you tell them about it? That's a really good question. And for me, I would say morally, I would not, unless their life is in danger. I think in that instance, I would probably, do the interview and put the story together. And I'd probably talk to my station and my network and say, look, this is the situation. Because at the end of the day, I've done tons of stories where people's lives were put in danger. And at the end of the day, I still have to do my job. So I would recommend talk to your station and see how they would handle it. But if it were me, and depending on the situation, if their life is in danger, if I did this story and they said, my rapist is showing up at my house, stalking me and threatening me, I would say, look, please call the police. This is what call the police, let them handle that situation. The story would still air, but at the same time, letting them or trying to advise them on what they should do with their life, that's a boundary I feel you should not cross. Because again, you're there to do a job. You're not their friend, Now, if you want to tell them, I've had instances where I had a woman, she was raped in the military, and a civil rights attorney came to me and I told him, I said, look, if you ever have these cases happen, please feel free to send people my way and I will give them advice. And he said, great, thank you. And the first thing I would say to these people is, are you talking to me as Terace Garnier, the rape survivor? Or are you talking to me as Terace Garnier, the journalist? And then they would say, oh, Terace Garnier, the survivor. Okay, that being said, the advice I give you has nothing to do with my network or my station that I'm with. And this is advice based on what I have done. Okay. And I'm suggesting that you do these things, but you don't have to. However, as a journalist, I'm not going to give you advice as a journalist. I'm not going to cover this as a story. So you need to understand, if you want coverage, I can't do both. So you need to decide which one you want. And so in a lot of those instances, the person was coming to me as the survivor, not as the journalist. And I never did stories on those individuals because that wasn't my place. I was there to strictly advise them based on my own experiences. So but that was an excellent question. Thank you for that, Evan.
Of course. So you also mentioned that, and this is something that we've talked about in the past with MVJ has done some efforts around disability journalism.
Mm-hmm.
Very similar situations in terms of the way that journalism, the media tends to treat those stories as less important sometimes. Mm-hmm. So here's a question for you with regard to that. When your newsroom, when you have a story that you want to go after, that you have the permission of the survivor, of the victim, whatever the situation may be, you have all the information that you would need, and your network or your newsroom leadership team tells you no. is there a way to, like, what would you advise people do with that then? Because if you've already put in that much research and time, it might feel a little bit wasteful.
Mm.
But also, if it's a story that you feel is important and needs to be told, do you try to convince your leadership team to go ahead and let you run it? Or do you take it to another outlet or another journalist and let them try and do what they can with it?
Oh, you trying to get me in trouble. You are trying to get me in trouble. That's a good question. In the past, what I would do is I would keep pushing it. But at the end of the day, it still didn't get covered and it only made people upset with me. So I think you have to understand the environment of where you're working. You have to understand what you can push and what you can't. You have to understand what battles are worth fighting and what ones are let it go. And so that one kind of depends on where you work and the type of relationships that you have. There's times where your station will say no because there's breaking news, or, you know, a school shooting just happened. And so the story that you did, you know, takes the back seat. So if that's the case, then, oh, okay, well, they're not saying no because they're not interested. It's just breaking news happened. So give it a week or so and say, hey, remember that story we were going to do? Is there any way we can do it again? Or can we air it? I think in those instances, yes. But if I had a story that I did and I was almost done with the story. Actually, I was done with the story. They were reviewing the script. And after they reviewed it, they said, oh, we're going to hold off on airing it. And I said, okay, cool. And then 2 weeks passed. And then I said, okay, well, are we going to do a story? Yeah, we're thinking about it. We're going to hold off on it. You know, we're just waiting for the right moment. Okay. About a month later, are we going to do the story? And they kept making excuses. And then finally, someone pulled me aside and said, Terace, we don't want to do the story. Why didn't you just tell me that 6 months ago? I was asking, you know, like, just tell me that. But the reason why they didn't want to do the story is because the woman who I was doing the story on, she was a rape victim in the Navy. She had been gang raped. She was a part of the submarine unit. So she was one of the first women to be a part of the submarine units. And they found out, she had her medical records. They found out that the military doctors had diagnosed her as bipolar. They saw that and they were like, no, we don't want to do it now, because now her mental stability was in question. And I said, but you can't join the military and be bipolar. So obviously what happened to her caused that. Have y'all ever stopped to think about that? Anyways, I'm still mad about that story that we didn't get to air it. But, you know, in that instance, that was one of those things where they were like, no, we don't want to touch that. You know, and they're thinking legally, they're thinking about, at the end of the day, it's still a business. So they're like, yeah, that ain't worth it if we get some lawsuits or the military comes after us if we get this wrong. So I think you have to weigh what your relationship is with the people you work with. But I would say push it a couple times. And if they keep saying no, let it go. You know, now what you do on your own time, if you decide to slip it to a friend that works at another, you know, I can't tell you what to do on that. That's your choice. I know people who have done that. They're like, hey, I really think this should be covered. You should go call so-and-so. And I think this would be a great story. There's people who do that, you know, I let people decide how they feel about that, especially if it is a story that you feel passionate about. And I see we got a hand raised over here.
Yes, so we have Karan, who is one of our MVJ fellows. She is at NBC 10 in Philadelphia, so I'm sure
Billy, I met you at an event
Yes,
I think it was last summer. I think it was.
it was MVJ last summer and NABJ.
Yep, that's right. Yes, because you asked the question about what are you guys doing for military journalists, and I was like, yes, honey, yes, girl, I love it.
Guilty as charged. Okay, so it's so good to see you.
It's good to see you
I
too.
know that writing this book is so brave. It's incredibly beautiful. It's incredibly brave. But you know, for many, many years, women were categorically being denied disability when it came to mental health if they acknowledged they experienced military sexual trauma for years and years and years. Now, they just changed the way things are done, and when there is a sexual assault, it's no longer in the hands of that command to handle it. My question to you is, when it comes to And I am a fellow survivor. Most of the women I know in my life are survivors. But when it comes to military sexual trauma, are you able to speak directly to women who are still in about how they can move forward?
I have. The example I gave a little earlier about the woman who was seeking legal advice, she's still in the military, in the Army, actually. And so I do try to give advice on what steps they can take as someone who went through the whole military legal process. Now, granted, when I went through it, it was in 2013, 2014. They've changed a lot since then. But I think the basics of what you should do as far as pursuing it, gathering evidence and things of that nature is what I would kind of give them advice on. This is what you need. Make sure you have copies of all your documents. Yeah. Make sure that you don't tell people where some of those copies are, you know, screenshots, emails, all of those things, keep those. And I know there's been a lot of stories coming out of women who were assaulted or raped, and it didn't end too well for them. And to be honest with you, and I have a problem with this, I've noticed this seems, and maybe this is just my opinion, but the only time women of color who are in the military that get assaulted, the only time their stories get covered is if they end up dead. And for me, it's very disheartening.
It's true. That is so true.
It's very true. But we'll have, and I've seen several stories over the last few weeks of non-melanated women who have been assaulted in the military, and they do stories on them, and they're alive to tell the story. But yet Vanessa Guillen, the soldier in Germany who they claim committed suicide, these stories didn't get any internet or national attention until they died. Yet there was several instances of them reporting these cases to their chain of command and being ignored. And I think we
retaliated against,
like myself. I was retaliated against. So I think as journalists, we need to do better, and we need to work harder at trying to get that perspective, you know. But I know it's hard because you can only do so much. You take it to your station, they say, no, there's nothing you can do about it. And that goes into how they're trying to change the environment in networks and different stations as far as diversity and things of that nature.
You know something, I do believe, and this is the hill I'm probably gonna die on at some point, but I really believe if a woman or a man, but it's overwhelmingly women, came up in the culture of the military, it's a microcosm of our culture in general, same stat, come up in a culture where we know there's a history of consistency with retaliation, with being demoted, with being ignored. But if it is reported, if they tell somebody, PTSD should become a presumptive condition, because that's another thing that women are denied. We're denied a lot when it comes to the VA system just because we're born women and have reproduction abilities. We got superpowers. But I thank you. I thank you for being so brave to put this book out. I'm really proud of you, and I will support you in any way I can.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing about your situation as well. I mean, that's already a sign of healing that you're able to share that. You know, a lot of people
So it's become part of my life's work to support other survivors as well.
Thanks, Karan. Next up, we have Raymond Drumsta here.
Hello, Raymond.
Hi there. Wow. Fantastic seminar. So because your talk is so great here, I have lots of questions, and I hope I don't want to monopolize the time here. Okay. My questions usually are really concerned access to information and also statistics.
Okay.
First of all, and I mean, just as a thought problem, and from hearing from other survivors, you know, is the military compiling any statistics on reported incidents? Because as a thought experiment, I thought, well, how do you get those statistics? You know, do you FOIA, or do you FOIA for incident reports, and hopefully they redact all the information, but then you count up the reports and say, yeah, in this unit at this time there was this many reported incidents. Okay, and it seems to me that that's a problem that the military has. They should be tracking this kind of thing, but and also releasing the public information. but it's a difficulty for journalists too, developing that information. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, it depends on if you're covering it as far as nationally or locally. Nationally, a lot of I did national and local news. So nationally, I always reached out to the Department of Defense, or I would reach out to the Department of Veteran Affairs to get a lot of their stats. Now, they do publish those statistics, which I believe, if I remember, the most recent stat that I saw was reporting was up 400%. And then they said, but it's great because now people feel better about reporting it. That's why it's up 400%. And I'm like, are you forgetting the issue here that it's happening that much that it's up 400%? Like, I know you're trying to see the grass is green on the other side, but there's still a lot of people are reporting it. And so a lot of times you have to go and get those stats, I would say, starting there. And then you can go to the units themselves and reach out to their public affairs officers and say, hey, I'm doing a story on this. These are the stats that I found. Specifically for your base, can you provide the statistics of how many of these assaults have been reported? They have to give that to you. Now, how quickly they give that to you, that's a whole nother story. You know, they may take their time. But I think that's the best way to go about it. And find out those statistics that you need and kind of reference it based on what the VA is saying, what the Department of Defense is saying, and then what those local units are saying as well.
Okay, can I drive on with, that's great. That answers a couple of questions all in one fell swoop. I've done a little research on looking at court-martial cases. This is in general with crimes that occur in the military. Is the military, and maybe I'm probably pretty ignorant, but is the military releasing, or do you have to FOIA the underlying documents with criminal cases or court-martial cases? Because the military does publish, like the JAG Corps does publish their docket. So-and-so has been accused of this crime, so, like that. But the details of those underlying crimes are not, I can't find them anyway. Is this something you have to FOIA?
I would say yes, FOIA it, but you getting it, I don't know, because a lot of information legally they can't release. It's a government, it's a military government document. So they may, like you just said, they may redact a lot of it, either to protect the service member or protect whoever's involved. So even if you put in that request, I can't say that it will be the full unredacted documents.
Of course, because that goes to the protection of the victims too, which we all agree with, right? So, which I guess this brings me to my last question. I'm sorry to be monopolizing the time here.
Right.
You made a very keen observation about not asking questions of a victim/survivor that would indicate or cast blame on them, like what were you wearing and all that. Now, that said, is it permissible in your mind to ask, where were you when this occurred?
Oh yeah, absolutely. This is the way I would frame it. Tell me what happened.
Open-ended question. Roger. Okay.
Question, because then you let them tell it how they want to, and then you can follow up. Well, I just got back from pre-deployment training and I was in my room unpacking when the guy showed up at my room at 3 a.m. Okay, well, when you say your room, where was that? Well, I was in Japan. I was stationed in Japan, and it was in the dorms at Yokota Air Base. So then you kind of follow up with those. You're not accusing at that point. You're just trying to get more clarity. Hey, just to clarify, you said that you were at home. When you say home, what do you mean? Oh, I was in my dorm. When you're E5 and below, you have to stay in the dorms unless you're married. If you're not, then you're in specialized housing.
Because one of the things that it happens with everything is, what were you doing in that neighborhood? Right. And that's the kind of thing that people just generally say. Okay, so that answers my question. I appreciate that.
The way you just said that too, that sounded accusatory. What were you doing in the neighborhood, right?
Well,
You could say, well, so you don't live in that area. So what was going on? How did you end up in that neighborhood?
Right.
Exactly. That sounds a little bit nicer than what were you doing in that neighborhood?
I would never do that. That was my entire point. So, thank you for, I will look for the answers to the rest of my questions by reading your book. Thank you very much.
We still have about 10 minutes. So if anybody else has any
I have
questions.
comments. Does that count?
Sure. I would love
I wanted to talk about, and this has been fantastic. And a lot of the times I don't deal with, you were talking about journaling. And I am such a big advocate of that. Now, I don't deal with a lot of, sexual trauma and that kind of thing. But I do deal with, I'm a psychologist as well. And I deal with a lot of, veterans and with PTSD and different things. And I always encourage people to journal and talk about what happened, because until you reconcile what happened to you, it's just going to hang there. And I was in Afghanistan, and I was injured in Afghanistan, and for the longest time, it was drinking and, not being nice to my family. And then when I wrote a book about my experiences, and it wasn't that I wrote the book, to publish and all that, but I wrote it for myself, and you get that reconciliation. And so I always encourage people to journal, even if nobody ever sees it, because it forces you to face what happened to you, and it forces you to deal with it and reconcile that. The other thing I wanted to say is, you were talking about, your editor and stuff, not letting your stories through, and it's happened to me, and it's frustrating to me. One thing I learned, because I still get it every day, you get a pitch from somebody, you have to understand what their agenda is.
Right.
Right? Because so many people, I work around motorsports, which is not a big deal, but you'll get a crew member that'll come and say, hey, this is going to happen to this team, or that's going to, and the first thing you say is, why are you telling me this? And of course you never ask that openly. And obviously, someone in your case, you would never ask, why are you telling me this? Because it's going to be, but you still have to look at it from that angle. What's the pitch? What is your purpose in doing this? And a lot of times, especially when I was a young reporter and I started out working in newspapers, the editor would shut a story down and you would be like, oh my God, this is the best story. I'm going to win a Pulitzer. But you have to understand that the editor sees the bigger picture, and they would see that and they say, the real reason they want this story out there is because of this or this or this. So, I always say watch for agendas, but that's just my 2 cents. But a lovely time and learning all this. And I love to see the enthusiasm. I'm sure your energy is boundless, ma'am.
Oh, well, thank you. No, and thank you for sharing that. You make a very great point. Everybody has an agenda. And
Exactly.
so trust, but verify. And that's what
right.
I've always stuck to: trust, but verify. So you come to me and you say this, I'm going to get 2 or 3 sources to confirm what you're saying. That's where that trust comes in, but I'm going to verify. So I'm not saying you're lying, but I'm gonna make sure you're telling the truth.
Yeah, because you want to be able to defend that story. The best story is the one you can defend, and the one you can defend to the public, to your editor, to your executive editors, and anything as well. So bravo.
And thank you for telling other people to journal too.
Thank you, ma'am.
Raymond.
Yeah. To bounce off the last commenter about the journaling and how important it is, Heinrich Ibsen, the famous playwright, said, to live is to war with trolls in heart and soul, and to write is to sit in judgment of oneself. So he was all about it too, and he's absolutely right about that. Now, again, and I don't know if anybody's done a story about this, but I'm wondering, or maybe you'll do a story on this. Is there a corollary, or has anybody found a corollary between MST and veteran suicides? And I say that because there was a movie about MST some years ago, and the victim spoke very openly about it. But in the course of her rape, she also suffered long-lasting and debilitating and injuries, which she was not able to get the VA to pay for. And so I'm wondering, some part of me thinks that, having to navigate the maze of VA care drives people to despair. And I'm wondering if that's the case with MST people. Have you ever seen any reporting on that, or is that something that could be developed?
I haven't, but I do know that statistically, women veterans are more likely to shoot themselves when they kill themselves than anything, which I find very different. I would say that. But I mean, it would make sense. If you can make that correlation. The problem is, and probably why it's never been covered, how do you prove that? Unless they literally were raped and then said, I'm killing, and they leave a suicide letter and they say, I'm killing myself because I was raped. It's really hard to prove that that was what led to it. So maybe even if there are cases of that happening, maybe that's why it's not reported, because it's really, really hard to prove that that's what caused it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, no problem. Karan, what's your question?
Okay, so I really wanted to make a statement. Journaling is a really powerful tool. But I also want to acknowledge the fact that when you've experienced that level of violation and that level of violence, it's not always easy to face. You need support. At some point, you have to get support. Journaling and doing it on your own is not always enough. It's usually never enough. But that level of violation, especially in a place where you're protecting others and you're supposed to be protected, a lot of it depends on age and circumstance as well, and how much you actually know, because a lot of people still believe that sexual assault happens because somebody was horny, not because they're committing an act of violence against a woman.
Right.
So I want us to be a little bit more gentler without thinking about healing modalities, because there are many. Reconnecting with your own body, taking ownership of your own body, learning how to self-regulate. Those things take time. They
Yeah.
take time. And healing is a beautiful thing, but ultimately this is about healing. And you're helping a lot of people, Terace.
Thank you. And it's so true. I mean, the effects that those traumas have on you, that I'm still dealing with the effects of what happened to me as a kid, how it impacts me physically. And I tell people that. I say, everyone heals differently. Some people can go to counseling for a year and they're great. Other people, like myself, I will probably be in counseling for the rest of my life. And I have no problem with that, but I tell people, don't put a time limit, because also that can cause you stress and anxiety. Well, it's been 2 years. Why am I not fixed? First of all, you're not broken. So stop using that term. Second of all, you're not ready to be healed yet. It's not something that you race through. It's a process. And when you're ready, you will know you're ready, but don't pressure yourself and don't rush yourself. Because again, everybody heals differently. I went to a trauma healing retreat, and one of the things they said was, because I was in a group, they said, do not judge each other's traumas, because as soon as I told my story, everybody was like, oh my gosh, her trauma's way worse than mine. I thought mine was bad, but oh Lord Jesus, how are you saying, woman? And I just kind of laughed. I'm like, well, by the grace of God. But I said, now you're breaking the rule. Don't compare your trauma to mine, because trauma is trauma. What you seem as trauma for you may not be traumatic for me, but it doesn't matter. It impacted you in a traumatic way. And so I tell people that don't compare yourself to others. Well, I told him no and he did it anyways. And then I just let him do it. So, maybe it really wasn't rape. It really wasn't that traumatic, because this girl, she got gang raped by like 10 people. No, trauma is trauma. No is no. Do not compare yourself to others and try to belittle what you went through because you think someone else had it worse than you. And I always emphasize that. And I think that's self-defeating when survivors do that for themselves. Don't do that to yourself. What you experienced mattered. How you felt mattered. It matters. Do not belittle that, because you are a beautiful, wonderful human being that God put on this earth for a reason. And you better accept that. You are here for a reason. And I tell people, they say, oh, I'm so sorry what happened to you. And I tell them, don't be sorry. I said, I'm not sorry, because God allowed those horrible things to happen to me. Why? Because he knew I would survive it, and he knew I would help other people. That's the only reason why I'm not sorry it happened to me, because I'm able to help other people who may not have the strength, who may not have the support, like you said, who may not want to talk about it. I tell people healing's different. If you just want to talk about it and vent, great. Do you want to go to counseling? Great. Do you want to pursue the person that did this to you? Great. Whatever you feel you need to do to heal you is different for everyone. And whatever you need help with that, I want to help you with that. Some people don't want to report that. They just want to talk to somebody and get it out. That's fine. I'm here for you if that's what you need. And that's what you're doing now too. So I commend you for that. And as you can see, I get very passionate about this stuff, because I feel like people need to understand that you are so loved and you are so valued, and whatever bad things happen to you, do not belittle that, because you can deserve it, period.
I have a good friend that used to say, it's a process and not an event.
Yes.
It's a process and not an event. And everybody's trauma has their own fingerprint. It's its own fingerprint.
Yep.
It's going to be different in how you heal. And when you choose to start your healing, it's going to be different for everybody. But thanks again.
No problem, hon. Thank you. And I encourage you, and I encourage anyone else who's ever experienced anything, whatever that thing is that helps with that healing. For me, I feel a lot of what's part of my healing is helping other people. I have to believe that God let this stuff happen to me so I could help other people, right? You know, so for me, I feel like that's also healing for me, because if I can prevent one child from having to go through even a sliver of what I went through, then everything I went through was worth it, because I can prevent one child. Do you know what happened to me as a kid? I was 5 years old, and I remember laying in my bed, handcuffed to the bed, laying in my bed because he decided he didn't want to feed me for a couple of days because I was misbehaving, praying to God to take my life. As a 5-year-old child, I thought it'd be better to be in heaven with the angels than be living through what I was living through. Now, if I can spare any child from ever even experiencing an hour of what I did, then everything I went through was worth it. I have to believe that. You about to have me tearing up, girl. You know, but, and I'm so glad I was able to talk to you all. So anyone else have any questions?
Again, this has to do with reporting. I've done a fair amount of FOIAing myself, right? But one of the things that I never saw at Gannett, because they might be too cheap, is that they never, when a FOIA would get refused, they never followed through with lawyers, or at least in my little part of the world, never followed through with lawyers and all that. Now, I do a fair amount of FOIA on my own. Have you ever, or has your organization ever said, okay, you got clearly got refused, the appeal got refused, they're full of crap, the law is on your side. Have you guys ever gone to court or done an order to show cause or anything like that?
No, I never had to deal with that. I mean,
Okay.
because in a lot of the stories I did, I was a network. And so,
Yeah.
you know, if I said, give me, you know, this information, usually they did. I had one individual who didn't want to give the information. So I got it from the military. And then he decided to email me a bunch of nasty emails saying he was going to sue me and my company.
Yeah.
And you know how that goes. And I just said, okay, you know, well, that's your right. And, you know, I'm sorry, but what we reported was factual. Your father was watching child porn. And I as a
Yeah.
military service member, a commander watching child porn, I don't know what you want. He went to court and got found guilty. I didn't make that up. It was found guilty in court. But I'm sorry you have to experience that, and you must feel a lot of pain. So, you know, I know you're trying to take it out on somebody, but I'm not that person. I'm just doing my job, you know, and a lot of times you have people who will come in and make those claims and stuff. And you just have to be understanding, but firm. Like, I understand you're going through some things that must be really hard for you to have to deal with your parent dealing, you know, going through that. But what I reported was factual. These are the facts. And, you know, if you have any other concerns, here's the office in my building that you can reach out to, because there's nothing more I can do for you. And, you know, I really wish you the best. Sometimes you got to do that. But no, I've never had that situation come up.
I wasn't as gentle. People would accuse me of slander. It was a print publication. So I would, first of all, dear sir, thanks for the email. Second paragraph, first of all, the difference with, I explained the difference between slander and libel. Okay. And then third paragraph, you know, like the statement, like, well, this is all based on court documents and witness statements and all that. And we know that was it. Again, thank you for your time. Yeah, like that. So yeah, that's occupational hazard, right? So,
Yep. It comes with the territory. It is what it is.
One of the big things we've been doing is a lot with disability journalism, especially over the past year and a half, 2 years. And they do share a lot of characteristics in terms of the way the stories are treated,
Right.
and the way that people advise who have been maybe in that situation, advise treating the stories. And so why not, right?
Sorry, one little thing I want to say, piggybacking off of that, and I think the issue with like reporting on disabilities, the problem is how people perceive what a disability is. And that's why it's so hard to report on it. For instance, if I told you I was 100% disabled, would you believe me? I've had so many people. I have a service dog. He's somewhere around here. I have a service dog. I'm 100% disabled. And when people see me, they go, well, what's wrong with you? You know, so I think that's one of the problems, is people's perception of what is being disabled, missing limbs, in a wheelchair, using a cane. That's their perception of it. And that's what makes it so difficult to report on it. Because, for instance, like I said, I'm 100% disabled. But when people see me, they're like, you look fine. So, you know, for me, I'm glad that you guys are focusing on these types of stories and shedding a light on, look, a lot of disabilities are mental too. You know, it's not always physical. Granted, I have both, but Some people only have the mental aspect of it. And so I think just changing how people perceive that. For a while, I had a platform where I was shedding light on homeless veteran women and their children, because they're a huge demographic of homeless people. They're women veterans with kids. And people were like, well, why are you interested in that? I said, because I was a network news correspondent and I was homeless. What? Yeah, everyone goes, eh? And I'm like, yeah, I will report to work every day, do my job, go shower in the gym, and then go sleep in my car. Yeah, I was a homeless veteran. But people, when they hear homelessness, they think of the person on the street with tattered clothes, who's on drugs, begging for money. So I think a lot of this, and that's our kind of what we can do as journalists, is shed light on these other areas that people don't think about. Yes, you can be homeless and live in your car and still work a full-time job. It's called couch surfing. Or yes, you're disabled, but you could have inward disabilities that people can't see. And so I commend you all for reporting more on that and shedding a light on that, because I think it's so important to let people know this so we can start changing people's mindsets on how they perceive those things.
Absolutely. And that's always the goal, right? Especially with, I mean, it is a point of diversity in a lot of ways, because that diversity of experience, more so than anything else, the way you experience the world is totally different. And there's a lot of times where stories either don't necessarily reflect that properly or just don't get covered at all.
You know something? I'm a part of the Speakers Bureau for MVJ, and I'm one of the people who have been walking this line with MVJ when it comes to invisible disabilities, intersectionality, what happens with homeless veterans, the truth about what happens with homeless veterans in the VA. And it's been some of the most meaningful work of my life. It has honestly been some of the most meaningful work of my life, because people really don't know. They don't understand that you can look perfectly fine on the outside. You're not broken, but you have issues that need to be treated and dealt with differently every single day of the rest of your life. So thank you for acknowledging that, Terace.
No, thank you. I'm actually hoping, since we took in NABJ Sisters, I'm trying to submit a application for one of the panels, and I wanted to hold a panel about overcoming trauma. And have, I'm trying to find a couple other people that can join that panel that can discuss the different types of traumas and how we overcome and handle them. So that's why I said I want to talk to you more later on. But yeah, it's very important to shed a light on this stuff. The more we talk about it, the more people be educated. And also, as far as like a sexual assault and stuff, the more we open up and talk about it, the less likely, one, people are going to do it, and two, the people that are doing it aren't going to keep doing it. Because now they're like, let me tell you, the man that assaulted me as a child, he told me as a kid, you could tell anybody you want. As a matter of fact, here, you want me to call him up? Tell whoever you want. They will never believe you. And guess what? He was right. And 25 to almost over a couple decades later, he's still running free as if nothing happened. Who knows how many other children he's messed with because somebody did not report him, or he just kept getting away with it. So now I'm hoping with us opening up and talking about these things, whoever's doing it, they'll get stopped before somebody else gets hurt.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Terace, for joining us for this webinar. We really, really appreciate it. And thank you to everybody who attended. You guys brought some great questions, and I'm glad that we got some time for discussion. This is a super important topic to actually go over. So I hope everybody has a great rest of your evening. I'll be following up with Terace's email, as well as the link to the recording once it's edited live, good to go. For anybody who would like to review any of the tips or anything like that. And if you guys need anything else from MVJ or anything, feel free to let us know anytime.